Southern Fried True Crime covers cases that are not suitable for young listeners, and there may also be some explicit language used. Listener discretion is advised. I have never been a runner. I have read about the endorphin rush, and I know many people who love to run or jog, but I just don't. I'm sure a lot of you hated doing laps in school like I did, so you get it. But I'm also sure many of you are runners, and you do understand the joy and freedom that form of exercise brings. I have been a long-time walker, though, at least before my odyssey of back surgeries. So I know I would give anything to hit the pavement again like I used to. Maybe walking is a different kind of endorphin rush, but I did love it. It was time with my dog, with my music, my podcasts, or getting lost in an audiobook. It's a special sort of freedom. The best way to clear my head. I loved the feeling of my shoes hitting the pavement. It felt like power and purpose. And all women should feel that freedom. Fresh air instead of the moist air inside of a loud gym. The freedom of solitude. There is a reason why running while female is a hashtag. Because most women don't really feel free. They are hyper aware of their surroundings, of catcalls that may be innocent or could be sinister. In today's episode, Sydney Sutherland may have felt a false sense of security as she ran in her rural community. The kind of place where you know your neighbors and you all wave at each other on the road. But someone was watching Sydney. She wasn't safe. And what's sad is she may have even waved at him that day. Welcome to episode 164, The Abduction and Murder of Sydney Sutherland. Alex Nicholson was crazy about Sydney Sutherland. She was the love of his life. They'd been together for 4 years, since they were about 20 years old, and lived together in Jackson County, Arkansas with their dogs. Sydney was Alex's dream girl. Sweet, pretty, and always thinking of others, she was a successful nurse with her whole life ahead of her. His mother, Amy, also loved Sydney. She described the two as a stunning couple. What more could Alex ask for? According to The Sun, Alex and Sydney planned on getting married after they were stable in their career paths. Alex's mom, Amy, couldn't wait for her beautiful grandbabies. In August of 2020, Sydney said goodbye to Alex as she headed out the door for her daily run. Even though she had just returned from a family vacation to Florida late the night before, Sydney would not miss working out for anything. Alex knew she had been to the gym that morning already with her trainer, but Sydney was a fitness junkie. He wasn't surprised that she was still going to go on her regular run too. Wearing her favorite pink tennis shoes, Sydney left around 2:30 p.m. The run never took her more than an hour or so. So when 5 p.m. rolled around, Alex was worried. Where was Sydney? Frantic, he called her mother Maggie, but she was also at a loss. Immediately, Maggie went to the area where Sydney always jogged. She drove up and down the road, but couldn't find her daughter. After racking their brains for where Sydney could be, they realized this situation was dire. Sydney was nowhere to be found. By 7 p.m., Alex and Sydney's family called the Jackson County Police to report a missing person. Sydney Claire Sutherland was born on September 18, 1995, to parents Dion and Maggie. She was raised in Jackson County, Arkansas. Jackson County is the dictionary definition of the rural South. The landscape consists of rolling green fields that are almost entirely farmland. Agriculture is the county's primary economic trade, especially rice, soybeans, beef cattle, corn, and catfish. The Jackson County website boasts that they have the best hunting and fishing in the state. It goes on to proudly list celebrities who have visited for the premier hunting experience, including big names like Jimmy Carter and Arnold Schwarzenegger. To understand Jackson County, imagine a lot of beautiful, lush land, but not a lot of people. Only 17,000 people live in the 642 square mile county. For comparison, 8 million people live in New York, which is half that size. In Jackson County, people knew their neighbors well. They went to the same school, the same grocery store, the same church. People left their keys in their truck and let their kids play outside until sundown. Hell, the threat of snakes or feral hogs was far more pressing than the threat of violent crime. In a tight-knit farming community like this, everyone feels like family. No one was worried that someone would hurt them or steal their belongings. Jackson County residents had no reason to fear each other. Not yet, anyway. As was usually the case in Jackson County, Sydney grew up on her family's farm. Her family was very close, and she was very much an adored little girl. The only girl in her family, Sydney was doted on not only by her mother Maggie, but also by her two older brothers, Tyler and Sam. Maggie explained that she and her daughter considered each other best friends. The family resemblance was incredibly strong between the two. Sydney looked strikingly similar to her mother, and because of Sydney's Spitfire personality, her family lovingly gave her the nickname Sassy. Sydney was also what I guess you would call a classically feminine young woman. Her favorite color was pink. She loved shopping, and she was an avid reader, with long blonde hair, big brown eyes, and a stunning smile. Sydney was beautiful. So it wasn't just her favorite color that made her stand out. Beyond Sydney's good looks, she was a genuinely good person. Those closest to her described her as outgoing, sweet, and compassionate. She loved her dogs and was especially close to her brother Sam's daughters, her two nieces. Family members said the two little girls were Sydney's whole world. As a daughter, sister, and aunt, Sydney was everything you could ask for. Every aspect of Sydney's life was part of her lifelong passion for helping others. That's why, when Sydney graduated high school in 2014, she chose to pursue a career in nursing. Sydney earned her licensed practical nursing degree from the local two-year college, Arkansas State University, Newport. She worked as an LPN for the Unity Health Harris Medical Center while continuing her nursing education, and by December 2019, Sydney had achieved her registered nurse license. In August of 2020, she was promoted to an RN position at Unity Health. She was living with her boyfriend Alex in a house off of Highway 18 in the same Jackson County where she grew up. Sydney was an incredibly active woman who was passionate about fitness. In addition to having a trainer at the gym, she loved to run and would run the same route whenever she could. She began at her house on Highway 18, then headed down Jackson County Road 41 for a few miles, then retraced her steps back home. She didn't do this run at the same time or even on the same days. As a nurse, Sydney's schedule was crazy, but she did usually run this same route. On Tuesday, August 18th, 2020, 24-year-old Sydney was traveling back to Arkansas after a vacation with her family. They'd gone to Destin, Florida for some long-awaited beach time, which was Sydney's favorite vacation. Her mother, Maggie, said the trip was great and that everything went perfectly. They all returned home late the night before. The next day, Wednesday, August 19th, Sydney worked out with her trainer, but still wanted to go for a run later that afternoon, like she always did. Her family thought she was crazy to do so much, encouraging her to rest. Sydney went by her mother Maggie's house around 1 p.m. While there, she got her mother's mail for her and then returned to her own house. Maggie later said that Sydney told her she was going to bake some brownies or cookies, and as she left, Maggie said, "I love you, I'll talk to you later," and Sydney responded, "I love you too." Sometime between 2:30 and 3 p.m., Sydney headed out for her daily run, despite her family's misgivings. Sydney was a disciplined woman, and like many runners, she was addicted to the endorphins. She would probably feel weird not to run since she did it every day. Sydney jogged alone, taking the same route she always took on the familiar backcountry roads of Arkansas farmland in her community. A UPS driver spotted her heading south on Jackson County Road 41 just north of the U.S. Highway 67 overpass. From that information, we can tell Sydney was homebound, with only 1.5 miles to go. But she would never make it there. When Sydney hadn't returned from her run by 5 p.m., her boyfriend Alex became worried. Where was she? She always took the same route, without fail. There was no reason for her to be out later than expected. Alex called Sydney's cell phone repeatedly, but kept getting her voicemail. He called her mom, Maggie, to see if she knew what was going on. Maggie had no clue why Sydney hadn't returned home from her run. At around 7 p.m., 2 hours after Alex expected Sydney home, Sydney's family reported her missing to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. The urgent search for Sydney began immediately. Posts about Sydney's disappearance flooded social media. Hundreds of people liked, commented, and shared the posts to show support and help gather information. That same day, over 150 people assembled to search the area surrounding Sydney's known jogging route. Everyone in the community knew Sydney, and most of them had seen her grow up. They jumped at the opportunity to help the Sutherlands find her. Keep in mind, Sydney's jogging route wasn't a nice paved sidewalk in a residential neighborhood. This was rural land, made up of wide open spaces covered in knee-high grass. Even though there were 150 people in the initial search party, they still had a lot of terrain to cover. Sydney's brother Sam participated in the search. While he was out looking for Sydney with the other volunteers, he got an interesting call from an acquaintance. The acquaintance said that his brother, Quake Llewellyn, had told their stepfather that he had seen Sydney running over the overpass, headed south toward her house. Quake was a local rice farmer who helped in the efforts to recover Sydney. He participated in the searches, combing the area near Sydney's jogging route, and joined a Facebook group dedicated to finding Sydney. Of course, Sam was very interested in Quake's sighting. Not only did his sighting confirm the UPS driver's information, but Quake was quite possibly the last person to see Sydney before she went missing. During the search, Sydney's mom, Maggie, asked Quake Llewellyn about him seeing Sydney on her run, but Quake wouldn't say anything more. He gave Maggie an awkward hug and returned to the searchers. Maggie recalled that speaking with Quake gave her an unexplainably odd feeling. The next morning, on August 20th, the police contacted Quake for a statement. Investigators wanted to know as many details as possible about what happened when Quake spotted Sydney. But unfortunately, Quake didn't really want to talk. He just reiterated what everyone already knew, just that he had seen Sydney running south on the overpass. The same day, Quake spoke to the police on August 20th. Sydney's iPhone was located. It was found in a field approximately 1.3 miles from her home. The phone was not damaged, which led police to believe Sydney had not been hit by a car. Meanwhile, law enforcement and community members continued to search for Sydney. Helicopters helped cover the vast country fields. Sniffer dogs sifted through the opaque swathes of tall grass. Local news channel KARK4 reported the news of Sydney's disappearance and asked the public to be on the lookout for the 5'3", brown-eyed, blonde-haired woman wearing a white tank top and black shorts. KARK4 News also interviewed Jackson County residents. Every person expressed their worry for Sydney and her family. One person said Sydney was loved by everyone. In a press conference, Jackson County Sheriff David Lucas explained that he knew the Sutherland family well and watched Sydney grow up alongside his own daughters. Clearly, the entire Jackson County community felt the pain of Sydney's disappearance. The next day, August 21st, Quake and his stepfather, Michael Llewellyn, went to the police station. As it turns out, Michael had a gut feeling that his stepson wasn't telling the whole truth about Sydney's disappearance. Although Michael Llewellyn wasn't sure what Quake was leaving out, he encouraged his stepson to speak with the authorities again about Sydney, which is why the two men went to the station. Once there, Quake refused to reveal more information to investigators, but he did consent to let them search his 2019 GMC truck. At this point, the police were confused. Quake's connection to Sydney's case wasn't clear, but the authorities were eager for any leads. While searching Quake's truck, they found their first feelings of dread. The front end of Quake's truck was dented, and upon closer examination, officers found a blonde hair stuck to the dented portion. There were also cracks in the truck's tailgate, where officers found blood and more hair. Investigators sat back down with Quake, trying to get answers, but he stayed silent. He did hand over his cell phone, though, After looking through the phone's GPS history, the officers discovered that Quake was close to the area where they believed Sydney went missing about an hour after it happened. And Quake's location was only 2.36 miles away from where Sydney's phone was found. 2 miles might sound like a long way off, but remember that these rural Arkansas roads were largely unpopulated. Sydney probably saw a handful of people on her daily jogs. Police immediately recognized the significance of Quake being so close to Sydney's last known location and where her cell phone was found on the same day she went missing. The blood and blonde hair on his truck probably had already given investigators enough to believe this was now a murder. The phone was now just more evidence against him. In the early afternoon of August 21st, investigators drove to the coordinates they found on Quake's phone, which led to one of Quake's rice fields. There, the officers found a freshly dug grave with 24-year-old Sydney's body inside. She had died from multiple blunt force injuries. It had been less than 2 days after 24-year-old Sydney disappeared. Her family was devastated. They felt they had done everything right. Sydney had only been missing for a couple of hours when they reported her case to the police, began a search party of her last known location, and informed the public via social media to keep an eye out for any clues. Maggie told the Daily Mail that the entire family did not sleep for the 2 days they searched for Sydney. But even with their swift response and diligent searching, Sydney could not be saved. And it appeared that 28-year-old Quake Llewellyn had killed her. Quake Llewellyn was born in Newport, Arkansas on June 28, 1992. His parents divorced when he was in the 1st or 2nd grade. His mother, Carrie, gained sole custody of Quake. Quake's biological father would appear sporadically in his life, never remaining long. After a few years, Carrie remarried, but that relationship also ended in divorce. When Quake was in the 9th grade, Carrie married her 3rd husband, Michael Llewellyn. Quake loved his new stepfather. They spent a lot of time together on Michael's 5,800-acre farm. He considered Michael to be his father and even took Michael's last name when Michael formally adopted him. From 2007 to 2011, Quake attended Tuckerman High School. Everyone in Jackson County went to this high school, including Sydney Sutherland. She was 3 years younger than Quake, but the two definitely knew of each other. Since Tuckerman had less than 200 students and what was already a small community, everyone knew everyone. But Quake and Sydney weren't close. Despite being in the same building, their high school experiences were dramatically different. Sydney was in the Spanish club, played softball, and was a part of the National Beta Club, an organization for excellence in academics, character, and leadership. On the other hand, Quake was a B and C student who was regularly tardy. He had been suspended in junior high school for fighting and didn't do anything noteworthy in high school. Still, Quake and Sydney would have passed each other in the hallways. After graduating high school in 2011, Quake went to the local college of Arkansas State University, Newport. As you already know, Sydney would later go there too. Unlike Sydney, Quake didn't like college. He preferred to work on the farm. Before finishing one semester at ASU, he dropped out. You might think that Quake would return to his stepfather's award-winning farm since it was wildly successful. The Llewellyn farm was well established, going back 3 generations. They had agricultural interests spread across many Arkansas counties and were recognized as the 2016 Jackson County Farm Family of the Year. But Quake had different plans. He rented 500 acres of land and started his own rice and soybean farm. Quake was following in the footsteps of the rest of his adopted Llewellyn family, who all had their own farms and helped each other out whenever possible. In that vein, Quake's stepfather Michael helped Quake rent the land and provided him with some equipment. By age 23, Quake had moved out of his parents' house. 2 years later, in March of 2018, he married a woman named Gracie. She had 3 children from a previous relationship, and Quake became a stepfather to them. In 2020, Quake, Gracie, and their children moved in with Quake's parents, Carrie and Michael, in Jonesboro, Arkansas. They were saving to build a house, and Jonesboro was just a 40-minute drive from the Quake's farm in Jackson County. At this time, Quake was 28 years old. He was a big guy, 6'3" and 345 pounds, with a bushy beard and mustache. Quake knew his old high school classmate Sydney Sutherland was in the Jackson County area. Since Quake's rice farm was on her jogging route, Sydney often saw Quake. They would politely wave, as you do in the South. And that's what should have happened on August 19th, 2020. But it didn't. Quake had been caught red-handed. He was the last person to see Sydney. There was damning DNA evidence all over his vehicle, and Sydney's body had been found haphazardly buried in his rice fields. And the data from Sydney's cell phone records and Apple Watch corroborated her location with Quake's. If ever there was an open-shut case, this was it. After Sydney's body was recovered, investigators confronted Quake as their main suspect. He didn't want to confess, but his family pressured him to tell the truth. Finally, 2 days after Sydney's death, Quake revealed to the police what happened on August 19th. At around 2 or 3 p.m., he was driving down Jackson County Road 41 to check on a well and his rice fields when he passed Sydney jogging. As you know, this wasn't an uncommon occurrence. Sydney ran past Quake's farm all the time. But this time, Quake didn't give Sydney a smile or say hello. Instead, he turned around and hit Sydney with his truck. He then forced her into the back of the truck and drove 3 miles to his rice field. At the field, he raped and killed Sydney. He grabbed a shovel from his truck, dug a shallow grave, and buried her body. Following Sydney's rape and murder, Quake pretended everything was normal. He told police he wanted to forget that he had ever seen Sydney that day. He returned to his farm duties, checking on the well and his fields. Near 6 p.m., Quake finished working and returned home. He ate dinner with his family. No one had any idea Quake had ruthlessly assaulted and murdered Sydney. Later that evening, news of Sydney's disappearance broke. Quake's stepfather, Michael, called him to see if he knew anything. Quake shared that he had seen Sydney running, but that was it. He went back to bed that evening without telling anyone he had hurt Sydney. According to an affidavit, when police asked if Quake knew Sydney, he said he didn't know her that well. They had only gone to high school together. But when investigators went through his phone, they found that Quake had recently unfriended Sydney on Facebook. We're not sure what recently means here. Did he unfriend her the day before the murder, or was it after the murder, as Quake tried to distance himself from Sydney? Regardless, Sydney had definitely been on his mind. Today in Fort Smith News reported that a former anonymous acquaintance of Quake's said that Quake used to get in trouble for peeping into women's windows to watch them change or bathe. He was, allegedly, known to obsess over women he found attractive, stalk them, and bother them. The source referred to Quake as a troubled soul. Following Quake's confession to Jackson County police, he was arrested and held in jail until he could go before a judge. At this time, his mother Carrie and his wife Gracie contacted the police. They had found home security footage they knew investigators would want to see. In the footage, officers saw Quake's truck the night before Sydney's murder. At this time, there was no dent in the truck's front end, but when Quake got back from work that day, the dent was now visible. On August 24th, 2020, Quake Llewellyn was charged with capital murder, rape, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse. Initially, he pleaded not guilty. The public was in an uproar. Quake was supposed to be one of them, salt of the earth, an Arkansas farmer and family man. But now the community, especially Sydney's family, felt terrorized and outraged. For Quake's safety, he had to be transferred to a jail in a different county. He also had to wear a bulletproof vest whenever he went to court. In January of 2021, Quake underwent a court-ordered competency evaluation with a psychologist. His attorney was present. This time around, Quake told a wildly different story than what he shared with the police 4 months earlier in August. Here's Quake's new and improved version of events. He was driving down the road when he passed Sydney. He turned around in his truck, for no apparent reason, but the dust from the gravel road made it impossible for him to see Sydney. Quake said he felt his truck hit her, so he stopped, got out, and checked to see if she was okay. He said she appeared lifeless, so he put her body in the back of his truck. He told the psychologist that he had no idea why he didn't call 911 after hitting her. He said he was just scared, and that it was all just a blur. He didn't recall feeling stressed at any point. He was aware that putting Sydney's body in the back of his truck and taking off was illegal, but he didn't want to get in trouble for hitting her. He took Sydney's body to the rice field because he was already headed that way. After driving Sydney's body to the field, Quake put the tailgate down, took off Sydney's clothes, and messed with her a bit, as he put it. Rape. That was what Quake Llewellyn was trying to hide through his vague descriptions. He raped Sydney. When asked for more information about how he messed with her, Quake's attorney stopped him from saying anything further. Clearly, Quake had been legally advised to not explicitly admit to the fact that he had raped Sydney Sutherland. Ultimately, the psychologist determined that Quake knew what he was doing was wrong when he committed multiple brutal crimes against Sydney. The psychologist confirmed that Quake was fit to stand trial. Quake's trial was scheduled, and the state's prosecution announced they would be seeking the death penalty. Sydney's mother, Maggie, felt that it was fair, telling the Daily Mail, "To me, he deserves the death penalty. He is a monster, an evil monster. She did not deserve any of that." Afraid he would be sentenced to death, Quake decided to take a plea deal. In an interview with Oxygen, Quake's lawyer said the plea deal was a mercy. Since the national publicity of Sydney's case was so immense, he believed that Quake would not have received an impartial trial, and he would have been sentenced to death. On October 1st, 2021, over a year after Sydney's body was discovered, Quake Llewellyn pled guilty to capital murder and rape. In exchange for his plea, the prosecution took the death penalty off the table. They also agreed to drop the charges for kidnapping and abuse of a corpse. Sydney's family supported the deal. While they wanted Quake to receive the death penalty, there was always a small chance he could walk free from a jury trial. Also, when Quake accepted a plea deal, it meant that he was not allowed to appeal any court decisions. This was the safest route to ensure that Quake Llewellyn remained behind bars. At the sentencing hearing, Mirror News reported that Sydney's family packed the courtroom. They all wore pink shirts, Sydney's favorite color. Printed on the shirts were the words, "Maggie's Girl." Maggie read a powerful impact statement. KLRT-TV reported that when Maggie began, she sharply addressed Quake, saying, "Quake, will you look me in the eyes?" She expressed how glad she was that Quake will be just a number in prison. She said, "Satan is real. The hands you hugged me with are the same hands you killed her with. She was not yours to take." Sydney's father, Dion, spoke as well. He said, "Quake, you are a 300-pound coward that hit my 100-pound daughter with a 3,000-pound truck." Sydney's brother Sam had a friend read his statement. Sam's statement detailed how, due to Sydney's death, he suffered from insomnia, and his daughters, Sydney's beloved nieces, did not understand why their aunt was gone. And then Quake Llewellyn was sentenced to life without parole. While the Sutherlands were satisfied with the outcome, their hearts were still ravaged by Sydney's loss. Her longtime boyfriend, Alex, was deeply affected by the murder of his girlfriend. His mother, Amy, told the Sun News that Sydney was, quote, "the love of his life, and she was ripped from him and their future. Alex tries to be really strong, but he's not, you know. He's kind of like everyone else day to day. Different days bring on different feelings. He had a hard time for a long while just going home, because Sydney wasn't there." Sydney's mother, Maggie, told the Sun she had walked the path Sydney took many times. She said, "I still go to where it was at. I've done every step she's taken to try and see what happened." Maggie went on to describe that the entire situation was a living nightmare, not just for the family, but also the community. On the day Quake was sentenced, Maggie told reporters, "True justice for Sydney, my daughter, would be for her to be here." When speaking to Oxygen regarding the court proceedings, Quake's defense attorney urged folks to think kindly of the Llewellyn family. Quake's stepfather, Michael, was the one who had pushed him to talk to the police, and when it became apparent that Quake was the killer, the Llewellyns told Quake to confess. The lawyer said, "They took him up there. They told him to tell the truth. They told him to cooperate, and he did what they told him. They could have certainly steered him in a different way. The family took a lot of abuse, and they didn't do anything. Any animosity that anyone is feeling towards the family is misdirected." As soon as Quake was charged in August 2020, his wife Gracie filed for divorce. Quake's family never asked for the burden of his horrific crimes. He ruined their lives too. Since Quake Llewellyn accepted a plea deal and won't receive a trial, we will never know his motivations for killing Sydney. The police couldn't identify a motive, but it's hard to accept that Quake acted randomly. Sydney was a woman of habit. Even though she didn't run at the same time on the same day, she always took this route. Quake knew she would return eventually. When you add in the anonymous source who spoke with Today in Fort News about Quake's stalking tendencies, it's hard to believe that he killed her on a whim. It could have been premeditated. But at the end of the day, this is yet another example of why women feel unsafe doing regular activities like jogging, especially jogging. Sydney's terrible situation is not new. In September of 2022, which was just last month, Tennessee schoolteacher Eliza Fletcher was murdered while on her morning jog. In July of 2018, Iowa college student Molly Tibbetts was stabbed to death while jogging. In September of that same year, Wendy Martinez, who was engaged 6 days earlier and worked at a tech company in D.C., was jogging when she was fatally stabbed. Karina Vetrana, a New York speech pathologist, always went on a daily run with her dad, a retired firefighter. But on August 2nd, 2016, her dad skipped the run due to back pain, and Karina was beaten, raped, and strangled while alone on her run. This is only the beginning of a very long list of women harmed while out going on a run. Michelle Hamilton wrote a fantastic article for Runner's World entitled Running While Female, which is where the hashtag started, I believe. Hamilton begins by explaining that 3 young women were murdered mid-run over a period of 9 days in the summer of 2017. In case you've lost track, none of the women we've already discussed were murdered in the summer of 2017. These were 3 additional women. Hamilton doesn't name the women, but she does clarify that all 3 were running in broad daylight on routes they'd gone before. In a world where merely existing is unsafe for women, these 3 had taken precautions, but it wasn't enough. If you're a woman who runs, I'm not trying to scare you. I commend you on your commitment to your mental and physical health. And although it can feel unsafe, the chances of being murdered mid-run are incredibly slim. According to Hamilton, it's lower than 1 in 35,336 people. But it's similar to a fear of flying. You know in your head that you're more likely to die while driving, but in your heart, that plane is still 30,000 feet off the ground. We know in our heads that the chances of being kidnapped or killed while running is microscopic, but it's still terrifying. Helping women runners feel safe is a complex solution. There isn't a charity that will accept your donation or a center that needs items. Please watch out for the runners you see on the street. Be another set of eyes on the lookout for their safety. And if you're a man, for the love of God, don't yell anything at a running woman. It's annoying and scary. It isn't funny. She isn't flattered. You're just an asshole. Maybe a harmless asshole in your mind, but you need to consider that you are actually terrorizing a woman. In honor of Sydney, her alma mater, Arkansas State University, Newport, began the Sydney Sutherland Memorial Scholarship. According to ASU's website, it's designed to help meet the educational needs of students who demonstrate financial need. A year after Sydney's death in 2021, family and friends of Sydney walked her jogging route in her honor. Naturally, they all wore pink. The overpass Sydney ran has since been named for her. A close friend of the Sutherland family, Dr. Kelly McKinney, spoke to Channel 8 News and said, "It is hard, and a lot of people in the community are having to relive just one of the worst days of their lives today. She was a light, you know, like she could light up a room. She had an infectious smile." Yes, that is a direct quote, and yes, I considered removing it. I have done it many times since the true crime world has started mocking what they consider a trope, when someone lights up a room. But as someone who has researched and written over 160 episodes, I can tell you that this is how families talk about their loved ones. It is how they remember their beautiful daughters. I don't even know how many times I've deleted that quote now, but it's starting to feel gross. Sydney Sutherland was beautiful, and like many beautiful women, it's probably why she was targeted. I guess we aren't supposed to point that out, but I think it's pointless to ignore it. Attractive women are targeted all the time in all kinds of situations. I did worry about releasing this episode so soon after Eliza Fletcher's murder from Memphis, Tennessee, feeding into that missing white woman syndrome. It certainly wasn't intentional. Sydney's case had been on my schedule for months, and Andrea had already researched and written her part of the script. Why should we move Sydney's case? We chose it because it's a compelling story, because it does seem to happen so often even though statistics say otherwise, and because women should be able to run with freedom. But we don't live in that world. Telling Sydney's story is a way to specifically warn women who may feel safer running in rural areas. I covered Christy Cornwell's murder earlier this year, a 38-year-old woman walking on a 2-lane country road, so rural it was practically just her parents' driveway. She not only knew self-defense, she had a false sense of security because of her rural surroundings. We tell these stories to bring awareness. Eliza's murder appears to have been random, but Sydney Sutherland was targeted, maybe even stalked. It's possible Quake made a split decision that day, but they did know each other, and she probably never dreamed he would be a threat. They had even waved at each other when she was out running before. If you are a runner, please bear in mind that even though your common route feels the best, it may not be the safest. Change up your running routes, and while it's difficult in our heavily scheduled lives, change up your daily routine as much as possible. We all just want to make it home. Even in a rural small town where you think you know everyone, there could still be someone dangerous watching, waiting. Try not to make it easier for them. Southern Fried True Crime is hosted and produced by me, Erica Kelley. Today's episode was researched and written by Andrea Marshbank, with additional writing by me. Southern Fried's original music is by Rob Harrison of Gamma Radio, and the original graphic art is by Coley. I apologize for my absence. I've had some health issues. As you can probably tell from my voice, I had a biopsy on my soft palate, and though it was benign, it took a while to heal, and I'm still rough sounding. If you have any case suggestions, go to my website and then go to the listener suggestion tab. This is still the best way for me to get those little-known cases y'all always send me. Please remember that I do not accept suggestions on social media private messages. With 3 platforms to manage, it is very overwhelming for me. I hope you understand. But please come join our Facebook group, Southern Fried True Crime Fans Discussion Group, where we swap recipes, worship Dolly Parton, and share memes. I much prefer spending my social media time in our lovely group. We do, of course, discuss true crime, not just Southern Fried, but all kinds, but it is still very much a Southern lifestyle group. Our group is a safe and fun corner of Facebook, and by God, we mean it when we say no shit asses allowed. It's not just a motto, it's how we run the group. If you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe, and please tell a friend or rate and review on iTunes. I'm also on all large platforms like iHeart, Stitcher, Spotify, and now Amazon and Audible. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Y'all take care.